All right. So good morning and happy Open Access Week, everybody. My name is Chris Barnes, and I'm the Digital Publishing Librarian at Adelphi University Libraries. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning. I'm delighted to have 4 of my faculty colleagues here, each from a different department, but all of whom have published their scholarship recently open access, and with the help of the APC fund maintained by the Provost office and the university libraries. We have Dr. Melissa Randazzo, Assistant Professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, who published an article in the journal Frontiers in Digital Education, published by Frontiers, which is a leading open access publisher of scholarly journals. I'd also mention that that article was co-authored with Professor Reem Kamis Dakwar, also from that same department. We also have Dr. Dominic Fareri, Associate Professor of Psychology, joining us today. He published an open article in the European Journal of Psychotraumatology, which is published by Taylor and Francis. I very rather judiciously decided to read off the journal titles rather than the actual article titles. I figured I'd have a better shot at actually pronouncing them. We also have Dr. Carl Giuffre, Assistant Professor in the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science, who published an article in the journal Scientific Reports, which is put out by Springer Nature. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Alexander Heyl, Associate Professor of Biology, who also published an article in Scientific Reports. Welcome to everyone. Thank you again for being willing to join us this morning. And with that, I'd like to ask you all the first question, which is if you could tell us just a bit about the work that you published and why it was important to you to publish that work open access. Since Carl's top left on my screen, I'll ask Carl if he wouldn't mind starting us off. Oh, you're muted, Carl.
Sure. So I've published a number of things open access recently, and to me it's really important just from a reach point of view. It's really important that work that I've done gets read by people who want to push science forward, and open access is sort of the easiest way, I think, for that to happen. When I compare citations from my past publications and things that I've published open access versus not, my open access articles always have way more downloads, way more citations, and it really shows that it reaches a lot further. So that's really important to me.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Melissa?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so similar to Carl, I think the reach is important. So I've also published in multiple open access journals, predominantly in journals like Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. The reason why this is important to me is because my field is relatively unknown in terms of what we do. So we are speech language pathologists. We work on everything from birth to death, involving speech, language, learning, executive function, feeding, and swallowing. So there's a lot of crossover in what we do with other fields in medicine and psychology and education. Our clinicians work in healthcare settings and education settings. But when we publish only within our own journals and our research is behind paywalls, then that crossover and the applications of the work that we do is not seen and it's not understood. So for that reason, I prefer to publish open access so that my work and the work of my colleagues can be read by professionals in other fields.
Thank you. Dominic?
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for organizing this event.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, yeah, really just to echo what's been said so far, I think open access is an important avenue for getting out our work and making it easily accessible to not just people in the field, but others who, might have an interest in the kind of work that we do. So my work is in social neuroscience. And within my subfield itself, there's a big push for just open practice of everything. So open data sharing, open access to publications. I've published things not just in open access journals recently, including the article that Chris mentioned, but also I've also put a bunch of things on preprint servers like bioRxiv and SciArchive, just to get the word out there and get the reach, make the reach as wide as possible. And I think it's important in terms of transparency and getting recognition and feedback from people in the field.
It's interesting to hear you mention preprints, because that certainly has been a hot topic during the pandemic, and it really can impact the way in which your discipline approaches open access. If there's already a readily available preprint server out there, it can greatly facilitate that, just in terms of general awareness as well. Thank you so much.
For sure, and there are pros and cons to that, which we can talk about later.
Yes, and I hope we will. Alexander.
Hi, so I'm a plant molecular biologist, and again, thanks also for doing this workshop. Yes, so in my field, people try to publish open access. So I have published 6 articles in PLOS, BMC, and Frontier series for like over 10 years now. But a lot of people also go this route of like cheating open access, where you pay a paywall, but then you pay extra money, even more, to have it open access, so it's more widely viewed. In plant molecular biology, a lot of the research is done actually on big research institutions, because you need greenhouses, specialized equipment, and so. And if you're in a small institution, you go to big institution to help, and they're happy to help you out with that. But since most of the research is done by the R1 institution, people usually tend to not worry too much about it. So they try to do open access, but it's not the highest goal. Impact factor is still the highest one. However, I feel that especially for PUI's institution, and more also research institution in developing world, should have access to this. And that's very hard when you have to pay thousands of dollars just to get access to a journal. So I think that most people will try to do it open access one way or another, but they might not go the round of full open access journal, but a paid open access, so to say.
Thank you very much. Yes, the APC issue, can be a real barrier, which is why we're happy to be able to support the funding of APCs. However, we also realize that article processing charges are probably not the future of open access, because they do create that barrier that Alexander was mentioning. And so now I hope you can each tell us a bit more about the general state of open access in your field, whether it's developments or reputation, perceptions. Carl, could you speak to that issue?
Yeah, so I think a lot of mathematicians really advocate for open access. I think it's from a scholarly and a pedagogical point of view. Like we really care about our students being able to access things as well in mathematics, and this has been at multiple institutions. In fact, when I was still in graduate school, I was at a really big college, and almost everything we were really pushed in towards open access, just because of how important I think it is. So I think in mathematics, we're all clamoring to get open access, because I think we all realize how important it is.
Thank you. Yes, and I know computer science is also far out in front when it comes to putting things open, or open licensing as well, with GNU licenses. That's great. Melissa, could you talk to us about communication sciences and disorders?
Yeah, I think our situation in our field is a little bit different than what Carl described. There are people who are pushing for more open access articles, but like I said, our field can be a bit insular. So we have 4 main journals for our field. And in our field, we are required to maintain membership with our governing body, which is the American Speech and Hearing Association. So with our annual dues, we get access to those 4 journals, and those journals are mainly what clinicians read to find their evidence for their practice. It's the scientists and the researchers that are trying to push beyond the scope of our field to be more interdisciplinary and to have our work more widely read that are looking more at open access. So it's a situation where the paywall essentially doesn't exist for our main audience to view our work because they will have access to those 4 journals. But when we want to share our work with our colleagues in nursing and medicine and psychology and education, then that's where we have to have open access publications for them to be able to see them.
I see. That's really interesting. I could see how everyone having that sort of access could really be an impediment to advocating for open access, because I can't tell you the number of people who think that if it's free online, or at least they can access it, then it's open access. And that is a difficulty. And little things like that have a major impact when you're talking about advocacy. Dominic, can you speak to these issues in your field?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I just ask you to kind of repeat the scope of your question a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I was just hoping you could talk about like the state of open access in your field, whether it's like developments or initiatives or just general perceptions among you and your colleagues.
I mean, I think in terms of perceptions within the field, I mean, people are for it. I mean, people are definitely for making their work as visible as possible and as accessible as possible to the widest audience. I think the issue that, I mean, I mentioned preprints before, but in terms of publishing open access journals, I think the issue that arises for my colleagues and I is the cost of open access. So, some journals, especially some of the higher end journals, it can cost $3, $4, $5 or more $1,000 to publish if it's a purely open access journal, depending on the impact of the journal itself. And so I think that's something that a lot of us kind of struggle with. But in terms of, the overall goal of open access, I mean, I think our entire field is absolutely behind it and pushing to making things more transparent and open.
That's great. It's not always the case. There's some fields have a high degree of skepticism regarding it, and in part because of the cost structure, the payment required often to publish if you're publishing in a hybrid journal or a Go journal. And as I mentioned earlier, we're hoping that that's not the future, that these article processing charges are really going to be an intermediary step whereby we get to a fully open future. But yes, I fully agree that, especially, I think Nature just came out with a $13,000 APC. So certainly things are not trending in a good direction if we take that as a bellwether. So, no. But thank you very much. Alexander, could you speak to that issue?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different, a little bit the same what Dominic said, is that the people have the ideas that open access is a great thing and we want to get the word out as much as possible, but also that the publishing costs are more expensive usually in a purely open access journal, which doesn't lend itself. And there's also differences, like there's 3 major, I guess I could call them publishing houses for open access. I don't know if that's the right term. But they have many different, a suite of different journals, Frontier, BMC, and PLOS is a major hubs for open publishing, let's call them. And there's differences in like the impact factors and also in how professional the stuff is. Like sometimes things in open access can take a very, very, very long time until they get the reviewers or something like this. So that has put some people off a little bit of open access too, like pure open access. So a lot of people, if they can, go to the, the hybrid model, so to say. But most people want to get open access for their journal just to make their work as widely visible as possible.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, the longer times to publication for OA journals is sometimes the result of their attempt to do everything themselves, everything in-house, and as a means of not charging those out of article processing charges. So often it's a balance between wanting to, make it as open and accessible as possible versus actually having a feasible timeline for publication. Actually, Carl already mentioned this a bit, so I'm happy to go back to him. You were talking about how your articles, your OA articles, are often downloaded more and interacted with more. Could you talk a bit more about that, and if you have, how you track that, perhaps, or how you keep on top of that?
Sure. So I keep track of the number of downloads based on the journal. That's really a readily available statistic, I think, for most journals nowadays. But one sort of interesting and fun story that happened, my last name is a little bit unique, and so somehow a paper I wrote on sewing ended up in the lap of the American Needlepointers Guild with a woman named Maureen Giuffre. And so I got to sit and meet with a bunch of needlepointers and discuss mathematics with needlepointers, which I don't think would have ever happened had that been published in something that was not open access. So.
Yeah, that's a great anecdote, and it reminds me of Melissa's earlier comment about the need for interdisciplinary, getting the research and scholarship outside of communication sciences and disorders. Could you speak, Melissa, a bit about if you've seen any differences in the way your articles have been received or interacted with?
Yes, definitely more citations on my open access articles, although I'm still pretty junior and my publications are still relatively new, so remains to be seen how it goes. But I will say that I've received a broader, more international audience for my work that's open access. And so just this year, I've received 2 invitations for international conferences to speak at because they read my paper that was published open access.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing. Wow, we're hitting gold here. This is great. Dominic, do you have any anecdotes or insight to share about how your OA articles have been received?
I mean, as far as what Carl had mentioned and Melissa had mentioned about things being more cited or anything like that, I haven't seen that yet. I think for my specific subfield, what's more, I think, important in terms of citations at this point, at least, are the impact factors of the journals and the audiences that read them. And so, yeah, I mean, number one, the open access articles that I've published have been relatively recent, within the past 2 years or so. So that could be part of the issue, that there just hasn't been enough time yet that has passed for the citations to kick up. But I haven't really found that yet. And I think, again, not to keep going back to this, but I think preprints, the preprint that I have published, because you can, they tell you depending on where they're posted, how many times they've been downloaded, et cetera. And those numbers indicate to me that a lot of people are finding the work and seeing it. But as far as the purely open access things that have been published and reviewed, I haven't seen an uptick there yet.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. Alexander, could you speak to that issue as well?
Yeah, I think it's, in my field, it's more like what Dominic said, the situation there, that it's more related to what the article is about and what impact it has, rather than in which kind of journal it has been published. I have not checked the download figures. I look more at the citations. It could be that the open access are more downloaded, but at the end of the day, it's the citations that really factor into the different metrics, so to say. And so I have mainly focused on this, and I didn't really see a difference between open access published or behind the paywall.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, impact factor can be a major issue, of course. And that being said, there's also major issues with the impact factor, with the the accuracy and what it's actually measuring and what it's actually telling us about research at the article level. And I know that open access publishing is struggling with that a bit in terms of how to, we're using altmetric and various other ways of ensuring that we are aware of how our scholarship is getting out there and being used, but it's still a transitional period. And so if we could talk now a bit about the funding process. So how was the funding process for you? Were you aware that you wanted to publish it open access in advance? Did you apply for the funding from the APC fund, after publication? Could you just tell us what that was like for people who might be interested in following suit, perhaps? Sorry, Carl, I'll start. We'll go in the same order if that's okay.
So most recently, I've had funding from outside sources, either from grants or from colleagues. But I've also gotten publication done through my library. So my library offered a certain amount of coverage on the fees, and was able to support me publishing in open access. Yeah.
Great. Melissa, how was it for you?
I've had some APCs covered through grants to my colleagues. And then I've used the APC funds from the Provost office, which I think is an excellent resource. And I'm really grateful that they have that for us, and also that it was maintained during COVID and that money stayed set aside. But I do want to point out that the university funds for APCs are only for open access journals. So I did have a request denied because I wanted to publish in one of the main journals in my field, and I wanted the article to be open access, but I was told that I can only use those APC charge funds from the university for journals that only are open access.
Right. So I can speak a bit to that. So one of the main models currently used by commercial publishers that you are oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Hybrid is what you're describing, is the name for it, where some are paywalled and some are not. And so we don't support that because, in effect, the publisher is getting two revenue streams. It's called basically double dipping. They're still getting their subscription dollars, but on top of that, they're asking for money to offset what they are claiming would be lost by virtue of making that work open access. However, that is sort of a fallacious assessment, because most of their money comes from subscription dollars, which are not going away if the article is made open access. So many funds across the country only fund what we are calling gold open access, or articles that are published in a journal where they are all open access for free. And there's a reason for that. It's harder for a journal to flip open access if they're still getting subscription dollars, if they're not getting subscription dollars, rather. So we want to make sure that the money is going to those journals that have really attempted to make that transition to open access. But it is a pain point for a lot of people, because, as you said, some of the most prestigious journals out there in various fields are currently a hybrid model. Dominic, can you speak a bit about your funding experience?
Yeah, sure. So the two of the articles I published in the past couple of years that were open access, I did use the APC fund from the Provost, and it was quite helpful, like Melissa said, to have that resource. I mean, the process itself was pretty painless in terms of requesting the funding and having it approved. So I mean, it was great, and I again, I'm thankful that it was available. Yeah, and then there was one other paper I think that came out that was open access, but I had because I was a consulting editor for the journal, and it was the first publication I had there since being put on the editorial board. It was like the cost was waived, so that was also helpful. but yeah.
Great. Great. And yeah, Dean Illick is here. She helps with the provost monitor that fund. So Dean Illick, if you have any, comments to share about the fund itself, we'd love to hear them as well. Alexander, did you want to finish out the floor and tell us about funding in your experience?
I don't mind. Either way is fine. But okay, then just to round up the field. So also in my last two open access publications, I asked for the funds from the deans, and in one it helped, but the costs are too high. So luckily I had a collaborator who also had funds from their university. So together we could chip in and pay the costs for that. So that was great. And the second one, I asked the journal to reduce the cost to match the fund that we had, and then they ended up waiving them completely. So I was very fortunate in that regard. So that was
wow. That is
lucky.
Wonderful and rare, I have to say.
Yes, it is rare,
but yeah,
can happen. But so I think it's great that we have these funds, and I also agree that it's rather a straightforward process, and I greatly appreciate that with doing this. But at least in my field, the costs doesn't cover what's requested. So I have to find some hybrid models to fill up the rest if it's necessary.
Yes, as we mentioned earlier, the APC charges can vary extremely widely. Whether it's some of them are only $500, but some of them are $13,000. And as Dominic mentioned, sometimes it is correlated with the prestige of the journal and what the publisher thinks that prestige is worth, in monetary terms. So I would love to hear just also other ways in which open access has potentially impacted your career or your teaching and learning. So open access can play a large role in the classroom, whether it's open access resources that are assigned as open educational resources, or just the ability of your students to more freely gather information in their research. Carl, I know that you've had some experience and done some work with open educational resources. I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so I've been using an open access calculus textbook for a number of years now. I'm also in the main teaching branch of the mathematics associations, and we actually dedicate an entire part of our annual conference to open access and what sort of resources are available for you and for your students. I went from a model where publishers were charging my students for the book and they were charging my students for access to the homework. And I'm now on a model that's almost entirely free, at least within the scope of my classroom. And my students just, they really seem to appreciate the fact that they aren't spending $300 or $400 for one class. Some of those textbooks, especially the ones that last multiple semesters, tend to be priced that way. And the great thing about open access, especially when you find a textbook that you like, you're never going to have to impose that upon your students and get that resentment, oh, they didn't use the textbook enough, or I didn't have the textbook at the right time. All of those issues sort of go away, and it's really helpful in the classroom.
Yeah, the ability to access the content at any time, is increasingly becoming one of the talking points I hear most. I hear a lot of students these days are really accessing a lot of content on their phones, and a lot of OER are optimized for mobile use in ways that regular resources are not. And so it can be even beneficial in that regard. Does any other member of the panel like to speak about the role open access may have played in teaching and learning or other aspects of your scholarship?
I can speak to teaching and learning. This may not be what one would expect to hear, but it actually has made teaching, or it's added a layer to teaching, because if I have my students who are training to be speech language pathologists, if I have them stay within the main journals of our field, which are not open access journals, they are, as you said, hybrid journals, but we have access to them as members of ASHA and they have access to them through the library, then I can ensure that the articles are quality articles, I know that these are good journals. When they search outside and they're searching open access, then they are exposed to an array of articles with different levels of quality. And so one of the metrics that we use in the field for evidence-based practice are levels of evidence. And so the evidence levels will go from 1 to 7, 1 starting with, meta-analysis of randomized control trials, and down to a 7, which is, expert opinion based on a consensus report. And so now we have to teach that within each level of evidence, you also have to look at the quality of the article, because there's a lot of open access journals and articles that are very poor quality. So that's, I think, in terms of teaching research methods and evidence-based practice, the layer that's been added because there's more open access publishing.
That's really interesting. It's a great, that level of information literacy, we would call it in the library, the ability to, vet these resources on their own and apply, a rubric or a standard as the, that's, yeah, and I was not expecting here. That's really interesting. Dominic or Alexander, anything to share?
I mean, I haven't really come up against any issues that open access has caused in terms of teaching. I also haven't, like the courses I teach in terms of ones that require textbooks, there isn't like a good open access option. So the standard textbooks in the field are your typical textbooks, from publishing houses like Norton and things like that. So yeah, I haven't really come up against the opportunity to use something open access in the courses I teach. I have taught statistics in the past, and if I do teach that again, there actually are a few open source books that are out there from people in the sort of cognitive neuroscience field that I know to be extremely rigorous and good statisticians. So I may use that, and I think that there are other open source resources for teaching that aren't necessarily textbooks, but more hands-on resources in terms of tutorials and things like that I can supplement in classes that may be more hands-on, like a research practicum course that I teach for our neuroscience program. But as far as other more formal, like open access books, I haven't really had the opportunity to use them.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it varies widely from discipline to discipline what is available. Just having one sort of power user of OER in a field can result in it being adopted across the country. So it's often a great idea to continually search. So that's something else I might as well add. I can help folks with is helping evaluate open educational resources. There's more every day. Alexander, anything to add regarding open access and teaching, or?
We teach several sections. So some of my colleagues in biology have a section of intro bio, and we have evaluated an open access textbook to replace one that's, you have to buy it. But the majority found that it's not as good as the paid version. So at this moment, we said we go back to evaluation in 2 years or so, just to have a look, just because it's continuously improving. I mean, there's more and more resources available. But the things that Melissa mentioned is also something, a problem for us, to train the students to be literate, have this information literacy available to distinguish between a good and a bad article, because there is a lot of not so great articles around, also, especially in open access journals. And to be able to distinguish those is also an important learning criteria, I think, or important learning point for the students.
Absolutely. Okay, so that concludes all of the formal questions we had prepared, and it's 10:37, so we have more than 20 minutes for questions. So if you could, if you have a question, please raise your hand or type it into the chat. And I'd like to, if I could, start off and just ask if there's anyone here who would have advice for those of you in your field or outside of your field who are hesitant to publish open access. What might you recommend or suggest to them?
I think that cost is a factor. And in my field, there are only, a handful of people that have huge grants and substantial grant funding. And so I think that, going back to what Dominic said about impact factor, and there's, looking at how this interplays with the cost of the APC charges, I think that researchers need to take some time to look at the journals and find the appropriate venue and do almost, I guess, like a cost benefit analysis. Like, is this worth, putting a lot of funds in to publish in this journal? And I know there's a lot more that goes into it besides just the reach of the paper, but also the visibility and the career trajectory of the author. So it takes a lot of time, I think, to think through, what is the most appropriate journal for this work? Can I afford to publish in this journal? And of course, we don't want to be putting submitting our work to journals where we go through the whole process of the peer review and we get accepted, and then in the end we figure out that we actually don't have the funds to cover the charges. So I think there's some planning that might need to happen even before you start to write up your paper, just having to identify a few journals that might work. That's
great advice. And that is also something that the library can help with, evaluating and coming up with lists of possible, open access journals. Anyone else? Any advice for your peers?
One thing I can say is that, at least in my field, many of the grant agencies actually have an area in your grant where you can apply for publishing costs, so you can get support there. And, I think that most funding bodies are very happy to support open access publishing. So if you put in a larger amount than you would need for a paywall journal, but the amount that you actually need for open access journal, I think that might be helpful to think that far ahead in the future.
Absolutely, funding bodies, and in fact, that's why some of these APC charges are where they are, because many of these journals expect in that discipline for the grant funding to cover, however many thousands of dollars for the article processing charge as well. The difficulty is in the humanities and fields where you don't have that kind of grant funding to still find the means of paying for the article processing charge. But I would point out there's also lots and lots of open access journals that don't charge anything to publish, and they are increasing in number every day. Any other comments that you'd like to share with your peers who might be watching this? Or any questions from the audience? This has been a really interesting conversation. Does anyone like to ask people to elaborate on anything or follow-up questions? I'm counting in my head now.
I have a question for my colleagues. I was wondering if any of you are using sites like ResearchGate to share your work that was not published open access. There is a trend in my field. I do see a lot of CSD people using ResearchGate, and I know there's probably a couple of other platforms like that.
My colleagues have been using ResearchGate actually for pre-publications more than anything else, or preprint. But it's definitely being used in mathematics and CS.
Yeah, I feel like it's used in neuroscience too. I'm on it. I don't really pay much attention to it. Like, I got on it when I was a postdoc because there was this big push of everybody, like all my colleagues and friends doing it and putting stuff on there. And then I personally don't pay that much attention to it anymore because I can't track all the different things that I subscribe to and have accounts on. I'm not sure. I get requests every so often from people for papers that maybe they can't access, but I don't see it as what's the word? I guess influential or as important right now within my circle.
Yeah, also in my field, it's not so important. I think I've seen one publication that quotes like a preprint server kind of situation. So, but it's not really I'm not aware that people are using it very much.
Yeah, I think it's really different for us because we get a lot of international clinicians. And so I get a lot of requests on ResearchGate, and I see a lot of people putting their papers up on there, I think because our work is used towards evidence-based practice. And if people can't access through the paywall, then they're looking on ResearchGate and sending messages to the authors.
I see Dean Illick has a question. Violetta?
Actually, it's not a question, it's a plea for the faculty members not to use ResearchGate.
I thought that might be what you...
I didn't know. Please tell us.
It's Academia, EDU, and ResearchGates are basically one of the platforms that are for profit, that are exploiting the current publishing system and the paywall to have faculty engage in exchanging the papers on their platforms. And then I don't know if you're aware, ResearchGate is in a lawsuit with Elsevier because of the amount of papers that are being shared. Elsevier papers that are copyright belongs to Elsevier because the authors waived their copyright ownership and they signed those, they gave them away. Elsevier is suing ResearchGate. So, and same is true for Academia .edu. The .edu here, it's a really sneaky way of presenting it as something academic institution, or it's connected to academia. It's not. It's another for-profit organization that is basically compiling data and using that data for later. We actually at this point don't even know how they're going to use that, but they're building a platform where they can access these articles that are, behind paywall. And some faculty members and researchers are posting them on their profiles on ResearchGate instead of sharing them in the indirect messages, right? Because you'll find many people are asking you, so why not just post the published version? And I highly discourage you from doing that. There are preprint services that Dominic already mentioned and Carl mentioned, archive.org and few other. Professor Heyl mentioned that he's publishing PLOS, and they have bioRxiv preprint server, which is perfect place for any of these scholarly outputs.
And eventually our institutional repository should outshine academia.edu and ResearchGate as a place for you to put preprints, postprints, authors accepted manuscripts. You retain the copyright to those pre-formatted, edited works. So you might not be able to legally share the version of record, but you could share the post-peer review version minus the formatting and the snazzy links and whatnot. So that is also another option. That was a great conversation. Any other points or questions? Hi, Sandy, yes.
That's right, Aditi raised her hand.
Oh, sorry, yes, Aditi, go ahead. Oh, Aditi, you're mute. Oh, there you go.
Okay, here we go. Okay, I have a ResearchGate profile. I never posted anything that has copyright, but my profile is widely reviewed and I often get requests for my articles. And I, as our dean said, I privately write to them and make sure that they don't, post it anywhere. So far, I don't have any problem, but I have got requests from Ireland, Israel, India, and Australia. All these people, posted on ResearchGate requesting my articles, and I wrote to them privately, but I don't post any copyright materials, but my profile is there, so I can save, from the request I get. it's widely viewed.
Can
But
I
I
ask
have
you
some
something,
really-
Adelphi?
What?
Can I ask you something? Did you create the ResearchGate profile for yourself? Because I did not create mine, and when I Google my name, I find a reference to my ResearchGate profile. So I'm just
You
curious.
know, the way I got there is very funny. There is a librarian at University of Maryland, and I have published a paper, and she cited me there. Then other people who cited me there got me there. It was not my choice, really, but then, you know, I made my profile looking better because people who cited me, they publicize my name there. I never tried, but I don't do anything with academia because that is really, really bad. So please do not use that.
Sandy, you have a question?
I was going to ask the panelists if your view and your colleagues' view about open access journals being predatory has changed in the last few years.
I do think, I don't know, I probably have a bit of a unique perspective because I do computer sciences so much as well. But if anything, the opinion seems to be that like things like SAS and MATLAB and Maple, these big sort of software publishers, you know, those are the predators, not R or these open access computer software languages that we see. And I think it's starting to spill over into our discipline as well, like just with publishing in general. Like, no, the predatory ones are the ones who are charging you because they hook you when you're an undergrad and they expect you to keep paying all the way up through the rest of your career. So I think that shift has already happened in my field, and I'm really happy about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you on the software side, right? So platforms like MATLAB, which are for a long time were the kind of main, you know, ways to go for certain things, are super expensive, and you would just have to keep paying for them. And whereas, you know, moving to things like R and Python, et cetera, are free and open source, and that's great. As far as the journals go, I think there's a perception in my field that, and I mean, and I've published in places like you know, Frontiers and some other ones that people feel are kind of predatory in some aspects, and you know, they're open access, but their charges for publishing open access, depending on the type of article, can be extremely high, and then you know, they kind of keep also, at least for me and some of my colleagues, coming after you for like reviews and publish here and do this, and so I think there are some open access journals that are still viewed as pretty predatory, not to single out Frontiers because there are other ones as well. There's what's the group? I can't remember. I think it's like Hindawi or something like that. I don't know if that rings a bell.
Oh no,
to
Hindawi is a good publisher.
Maybe for certain things, not for my field, but some of their journals have the appearance of being rather predatory. So, but there are others as well, and I think it depends. But I think in the Cogneuro field, there's a feeling that there are some very predatory open access journals that people are trying to get away from.
Yeah, I think in my field, it's like open access had a good, flawless record because BMC, I published my first article in BMC in 2007. So the open access had started out very nicely, and the rise of predatory journals is something that comes on in the last 5 years, or is a problem in my field on the last 5 years. So it's not actually giving open access a bad name. It's just that some journals, you be more critical, because there seem to be like a flood now with every publishing house has, or not the one with the big paywall, but some of the open access publishing house have like tons of different journals, you know, like every, like this plant and that plant and this plant, almost every plant has their own journal line now. And that's like viewed a bit critical, but the big open access journal, like for houses like Frontier and BMC or PLOS are not affected by this. So I think it doesn't hurt open access in general, but people are more careful about that.
And Hindawi was actually acquired by Wiley beginning of this year.
I'm sorry, by who?
By Wiley, the publisher.
Oh, Wiley. Okay.
Yeah. You know, there's a natural skepticism when we see, you know, a journal with lots and lots of articles in it, because or a super niche journal with a lot of articles in it, because we want to think that that is, you know, slipshod, or, you know, their criteria are not high enough, their standards are not high enough. But digital publishing also allows for publishing at scale in ways that, you know, traditional journals weren't able to do. And so, you know, as long as the peer review standards are still there and the editorial standards are still there, you know, taking advantage of the much lower cost of publishing digitally can be a benefit to getting more out there. But as you're all saying, you know, it comes with major caveats regarding even if it's just the solicitation you find in your email, in your inboxes, you know, that itself might not be technically predatory, but it's certainly annoying and can sort of undercut the claims to quality that the journals are making. Great questions. Any concluding questions? Okay. This has been really wonderful. I want to thank all of our panelists again, as well as all of our guests. This has been a wonderful Tuesday of Open Access Week. I hope you'll join us for the additional events that we have planned. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for organizing it.
Chris. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Everyone.